All right, Travis, we could begin.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Well, as you know, the saying goes, they save the best for last. I'm just joking. So, presenting today is Alicia, Kimberly, and myself, Ian. Chapter 12 from the Leadership Experience by Richard Daft, which is entitled Leadership Power and Influence. I just want to say one thing quick. I apologize in advance for any background noise because the neighbors I have here, I don't know what's going on with them. So just an overview of this, what this presentation contains, or what we'll be speaking about, the types of leaderships, the characteristics of the types of leaderships, the power and influence, and ethical considerations in using power and influence. So in the leadership experience by Richard Daft, they spoke about three main leadership types, which are transformational, transactional, and charismatic leaderships. So to kick things off, transformational leadership is a leadership theory which was first introduced by James Downton in 1973. It is the process whereby a person engages with others and creates a connection that raises the level of motivation and morality in both the leader and the follower. Transformational leadership can lead to changes in an organization's vision, strategy, and culture, as well as promote innovation in products and technologies. So rather than analyzing and controlling specific transactions with, with followers using rules, directions, and incentives, transformational leadership focuses on intangible qualities such as a vision, shared value, idea, in order to build relationships, which will give a larger meaning to separate activities and provide a common ground to help followers accept these changes that they want to portray or they envisioned. So James Byrne, he was an American historian, a political scientist, a presidential biographer, and he contributed to leadership studies. So he added that transformational leadership theory He added to the transformational leadership theory by proposing that leaders are successful because they are good at recruiting good employees and recognizing their skills and talents in each employee and using that to help the organization reach its goals. So he also argued that transformational leaders are attentive to their followers' needs and motivations, and that helping employees reach their full potential is beneficial to not only the employee and the leader, but the organization. So just a little quote from him. He said that in real life, the most practical advice for leaders is not to treat pawns like pawns, nor prince like prince, but all persons like persons. Now, well, I will agree with this in some circumstances because I mean, if I in an organization and I work in I given blood, sweat, and tears because I self-motivated to want to reach the top or improve or get a better position. And it have other workers who just there doing their job or who just there to just do the job. Why should I be treated like them? But who am I to talk? I didn't write books. James Byrne write the books. So there are four main characteristics that we see in transformational leaders, which are idealized influence, intellectual stimulation, inspirational motivation, and individualized consideration. So just to dive in a little bit deeper into those characteristics. So for idealized influence, we'll see this type of characteristics, transformational leaders develop their followers into leaders. So they give their followers greater freedom to control their behavior. And the most significant role of the transformational leader is to find a vision for the organization that is significantly better than the other one. So they come with a vision, they paint a vision. So that is one of the main, or I should say, the main characteristics you will see in a transformational leader. They will have a vision and they will motivate their followers to achieve this vision. And inspirational motivation, like I mentioned, pretty straightforward. They motivate their followers. And transformational leaders are considerate people. So they elevate the concerns of their followers from a lower level physical needs such as their safety and security to much more higher level physical needs such as self-esteem and self-actualization. So just to wrap up, transformational leaders, they basically influence followers. It's as straightforward as that. So they appear competent to their followers. They are role models for values and morals. They ensure that goals are clear, how we are achieving these goals, what it is about, and why we're doing it. And basically, they just motivate their followers. Transactional leadership, however, is a little bit different. So this type of leadership is a transaction or exchange process between leaders and followers. So followers receive rewards for job performance, whereas leaders benefit from the completion of their tasks. So it's just what you give is what you get. This is what this is about. So the transactional leader recognizes followers' needs and desires and then clarifies how those needs and desires will be satisfied in exchange for meeting specific objectives or performing certain duties. So they will focus on the present and excel at keeping the organization running smoothly and efficiently. So they're not really about having a vision of change or adapting to the change that's going on around them. They just strictly come here to sales down this month or down for the last few months, and I come here to increase sales, and that is that. So because transactional leadership involves a commitment to follow the rules, transactional leaders maintain stability within the organization rather than promoting change. Transactional skills are important for all types of leaders. However, in today's world, as we know, organization is always changing, is an ever changing thing. Society is always changing around it. And if you don't change, you just get extinct. Where I live is a developing community in terms of business opportunities. I live next to the San Grande Hospital. So there, right now, with the new hospital building, there's a lot of opportunity to make money or to start business to make money. And over the years, I've seen a lot of business come and just go because they lack innovation, they lack that vision to adapt to the change and be better, I should say. As I said before, transactional leadership is quite different from transformational leadership, as this table here illustrates. Transactional leaders occur when followers are moved to complete their roles and agree with a leader in exchange for a reward. So as I said, you get what you give. However, transformational leaders move followers to awareness about what is important and away from their own self-interest. So transactional leaders focuses on goals, whereas transformational leaders focuses on vision. That's pretty self-explanatory. So the transactional leaders, they use rewards and punishments for motivations, while transformational leaders use charisma and enthusiasm for motivation. Transactional leaders are reactive in nature, whereas transformational leaders are proactive in nature. So what this simply means is that transactional leaders react to something that is happening. They're just reacting. Transformational leaders, however, when an issue arises, they find a solution to solve it as well as to prevent it. So next we have charismatic leadership. So these are just some pictures of some charismatic people. So everybody know this person here up on the top left: Hitler, Martin Luther King, Fidel Castro. What about this person here? Anyone know who this is? Shout out to all the gangsters in the house who know that person. So, this fella here, Carlo Gambino, he was the godfather of the Gambino crime family in America in the mid 1900s, probably the late. He spent 20 years as the godfather on top, as the godfather, and he never went to jail. Well, there was a few attempts at his life, however, he survived it and so on. So based on these pictures here, what is one thing you could say about charismatic leaders? Anyone?
They have radical thought.
Yeah.
Sorry, what she said?
They're
Radical in thought.
thinking.
So what I was really looking for is that not all charismatic leaders are good people, or if it is a good leadership, it is not always a good leader and a leadership skill. As you could see here, these fellas, some fight for humane things while others just fight for money, but they were still influential. They still achieved what they wanted using charisma. So by definition, charisma is the innate ability to inspire enthusiasm, interest, and affection from their followers. From followers, I should say. So charismatic leaders have the ability to inspire and motivate people to do more than they would normally do despite obstacles and personal sacrifices. However, charismatic leader typically instills both awe and submission in followers. So awe is just a mixed feeling of fear and excitement, I should say. So what makes a charismatic leader? Well, understanding charismatic leadership qualities and behavior can help anyone to become a stronger leader. So this table here illustrates some of the main characteristics we see in charismatic leaders. So their likableness, pretty straightforward. They are likable people. They are people that we want to be around, that we enjoy being in their presence and so on. Whereas a non-charismatic person is not really a likable person. Their trustworthiness, they are trustworthy compared to non-charismatic leaders. Charismatic leaders create an atmosphere of change Whereas non-charismatic leaders, they try to maintain the status quo, like the normal. They just remain normal, while charismatic leaders push for change and betterment. So their future goals, as I said before, they are visionary people. Whereas non-charismatic leaders, they are just, as mentioned before, they just stick to the norm. They are well-articulated leaders, charismatic leaders are well-articulated leaders. They are strong and inspirational articulation and of vision and motivation to lead. They have a strong and inspirational articulation of vision and motivation to lead. Whereas a non-charismatic person don't have that. They are charismatic leaders are competent people, which is pretty straightforward. This, when you see a charismatic person, you know what they're talking about. They go say, well, boy, this man or this woman, they know what they're speaking about. They know how to do things. They know what they're about. Their behavior, as mentioned before, over and over again, they are unconventional, counter-normative, meaning that they don't stick to the norm, whereas a non-charismatic leader would stick to the norm. They are influential people, so they influence others to do things. So as mentioned before, charismatic leadership is not always a good thing, and it's not always something beneficial to our organization or followers. So because the basis of charisma is emotional rather than logical or rational, it is risky and potentially dangerous. So human beings are social creatures. And one of the basis of socialization is let me see. I'm looking for a term here to describe this. All right. We emotionally available. We always emotionally available. We always want to attach to someone or something. We always want to hear people tell us the things we want to hear. You know, it are some women who like to say, I don't like emotional men, or he too emotionally like to cry like a baby too much. Okay, all right. Well, I personally don't cry because bad man don't cry. But I'm still emotionally available. I still clingy to certain things, to certain people. I still want to hear people tell me the things that I want to hear because that's just who humans are. They are social creatures. And because of this, charisma deals with emotion, it could be easy to be manipulated by charismatic people because they tell you the things that I say you want to hear. They make you feel accepted. So charismatic leadership is very similar to transformational leadership. However, there are quite a few differences, as this table illustrates. So charismatic leaders, they influence their followers with the dint of their personality and charm, whereas a transformational leader inspires change through his or her vision and passion to get things done. Charismatic leaders is the head of the show. That is the person who will always stand out. Whereas a transformational leader is open to followers' input and participation. So the charismatic leader's vision is fulfilled by stimulating followers to leaders' vision. And the transformational leadership vision fulfillment are inclusive of their followers and their leadership vision. So charismatic vision is just strictly what they want for them. It's kind of like a self-serving purpose. Whereas the transformational leader, their vision would include both the leader and the followers. So charismatic leaders are most likely to emerge in crisis situations. So this is something we see all the time. During crisis, we always see that one person who, well, as I say, tell you the things you want to hear. Whereas a transformational leader can emerge in a different level of an organization. So they could probably like work their way up to the top. And so the charismatic leader behavior is aimed at leader-driven goals and promote feelings of obedience and dependency in their followers. So they're kind of like in charge, and they're making it known that they are in charge. And lastly, the transformational leader behavior is aimed at encouraging teamwork and commitment to share their goals. So power and influence are highly important concepts in the study of leadership, because leadership relies strictly on the use of power to get things done. So presenting power, influence, and leadership is Kimberly.
Thank you, Ian. My bad man friend, Ian. Good afternoon, everyone. I am going to elaborate on power, influence, and leadership. Next slide. So what is power? Power is the ability or capacity to do something or act in a particular way to bring about desired outcomes. It cannot be seen, but its effect can be felt. Next slide. Influence. Influence is the capacity to have an effect on the character, development, values, beliefs, or actions of others. Sometimes the term power and influence are used synonymously, but there are distinctions between the two. So basically, influence is, for example, as a child, you may have had the experience of doing things that you didn't really want to do because a person in the group influenced others to do it, right? Or as right now, you may have had a change in the major because of the influence of someone important in your life. I have some of us who may have shifted our beliefs, our religious beliefs, because of the influence of certain religious leaders. So that is the difference with power and influence. Influence is more of a constant change, whereas power, it makes someone do something most of the time that they don't really want to do. So power versus influence. Next slide. Right, so as I said, power is forced while influence is voluntary. For leading with power, the ability to force or coerce others to do your will, even if they would choose not to because of your position or your might. You know, you work in an organization and you don't want to do something, and the person says, well, I do it because I am the boss. Even parents do that, you know. They tell their children, I don't want you to go here, I don't want you to do, I don't want you to do that. Why, mom? Because I say so. It's something you even have a proper explanation, but you know, you have the power to do it, so you just say, because I say so, listen to what I do. My mother always said, do as I do as I say, don't do as I do. I didn't understand what that means, but now I know, right? And then leading through influence, the skill of getting others willingly to do your will because of your personal influence. You know, the people will more than be like, okay, it's okay, I'll do it for you. You know. Next slide. Power makes use of one-way dialogue, while influence creates a conversation. Now, this is self-explanatory. Power thrives on a hierarchical organization and favors instructions over conversation. Whereas with influence, it makes use of feedback systems where all parties are given the opportunity to provide suggestions. Next. Power can cost a business money while influence boosts retention. So as the slide before, this could relate to the slide before. Power leads to an increasingly disengaged workforce who are more likely to leave the organization, where influence boosts employee retention rates because the workforce is highly engaged. So it's, as I said, like the slide before, because of power is based on just, they don't want to have a conversation and just what they say, right? Based on instructions over conversation, employees will feel like, because they're not allowed to voice their opinion or to make their valuable contributions, they feel belittled, they feel demotivated, they feel like, what is my purpose here? I feel useless working in this organization. And I'm sure some of us could relate to that. Whereas with influence now, people would, then they have inputs, so they feel important, they feel like they're serving a purpose, they feel like they're contributing to change in the organization. So that will make them want to stay. So that's the difference between power and influence. Next slide. Right, so there are 5 bases of power, right? Power is often described as a personal characteristic, but as described above just now, organizational position also influences a leader's power. There are 5 types of leader power as illustrated in this exhibit here. The first 3, legitimate, reward, and coercive power, may all be considered types of position power that are defined largely by the organization's policies and procedures. The other 2, expert and reference power, are considered personal power because they are based on the leader's special knowledge or personal characteristics. So we're going to just elaborate a little bit on these powers. Next slide. Referent power. Referent power, it is based on followers' identification and liking for the leader. Like a teacher who is admired by his or her students has referent power. Another example of referent power would be like celebrities, like Beyonce, Rihanna. Even mass leaders can be considered a referent leader, have referent power, because as it says, it is defined by the follower because of the follower's admiration, respect, or identification with the leader. Next. Legitimate power. It is associated with having authority derived from status of a job, right? So a teacher who, besides being in charge of the classroom, is balanced in his or her appraisals, then she has to exhibit legitimate power. Another example of legitimate power would be police officers, right? Because once a person, like for instance, in an organization, a person has been selected as a supervisor, most workers understand that they are obligated to follow his or her direction with respect to the work activities, right? It is based on the follower belief that the power holder has the right to give an order and he or she has the obligation to follow. So that is why I say even police officers could fall as given legitimate power, because if a policeman stop you and tell you, come on the car, you will feel obligated to follow because you feel like they have the right to give, to direct you. So you will have you feel obligated to follow what they say. So that is basically what is legitimate power. Next. Expert power. It is based on followers' perceptions of the leader's competences. A teacher who is well knowledgeable about his or her subject has expert power. Right. Another example would be, I would say a doctor, a lawyer, because authority resulting from a leader's special knowledge or skill, that is the definition of expert power, right? So this is based on the follower's perception of the leader's competence. So, you know, you trust a doctor, you trust a lawyer, attorney, whoever you go to, you trust, so you will follow their lead because you believe that they are experts in their particular field. You know, if just some fly-by-night person come by and say, you know, I think you should do that thing, you're going to be like, who is you? You come out. I don't want to hear what you have to say because I don't believe that you're an expert, you're a quack. So you can't tell me what to do. But if you trust, so again, somebody could only exert expert power based on if the person believes that the person is competent. The person's perception, person receiving, their perception is that the person given is competent in their field. Next. Coercive power. It is derived from having the capacity to penalize or punish others. A teacher who wants to set an example in order to avoid having a similar behavior in the future, and she or he takes disciplinary actions against a student as a punishment, uses coercive power. This is the authority to force compliance by means of psychological, emotional, or physical punishment. Now, coercive power is broad. It could be, when they say psychological, it could be a spouse, exerting coercive power on the other one. Psychological, they abusing them. It may not be physically, but emotionally and psychologically, they're abusing them. They're exerting coercive power. Again, as I said before, parents exert coercive power on their children. They might do something that they didn't like. They punish them simply by saying, I'm going to take away this what you like. I'm going to take away this, take off the television, you're not allowed to watch TV. That is a form of using coercive power. So as I said, have different levels of coercive power, where it have a slave masters physically punishing their workers to do stuff. That is also a form of coercive power. Next. Reward power. Well, this is self-explanatory. From the time I hear reward, you know that it is derived from having the capacity to provide rewards to others. A teacher who gives extra points, desirable assignments, and grades to students who work hard shows reward power. It is the authority to bestow rewards on other people for good work. So if you're in an organization and you're working hard, you're going above your means to meet deadlines, you're doing what you need to do. When they call you, you're volunteering. It's okay, I will do it. It's okay, I will do that. The accent. We want workers who will just stay back a little extra time. We won't be able to pay you, but yeah, sure, no problem, I'll do it. You're seen as a good worker in the eyes of the bosses and them. So they reward you with things like salary increase, promotions, recommendations. I cannot relate to that. Next. Responses to the use of power. So, leaders use the various types of power to influence others to do what is necessary to accomplish organizational goals. The success of any attempt to influence a matter of degree, but there are three distinct outcomes that may result from the use of power: compliance, resistance, and commitment, as illustrated in Exhibit 12.3 here, right? When people successfully use position power, the response is compliance. So if you look at this picture right here, position power on the left, appropriate use, the arrow points to compliance, right? Compliance means that people follow the directions of the person with power, whether or not they agree with those directions. They will obey orders and carry out instructions, even though they may not like it. The problem with this, in many cases, is followers do just enough work that is necessary to satisfy the leader and may not contribute their full potential, right? When you use excessive, when you exceed the level of power, it's called excessive use, you get a response of resistance. Resistance means that employees will deliberately try to avoid carrying out instructions, or they will attempt to disobey orders. Therefore, the effectiveness of leaders who rely solely on position power is more than likely limited, because you need two responses they can get: compliance or resistance. Whereas now, with personal power, you'll get commitment. The follow response most often generated by personal power, which is expert or referent, is commitment. Commitment means that the followers adopt the leader's viewpoint and enthusiastically carries out the instructions, right? Next slide. Right, so this basically is just what I just did, is just explaining, with the successful use of position power, the response is compliance, as I just said before. So basically, it's just needless to say that, commitment, rather than relying on the position of authority in an organization, right? it is smarter to rely on referent and expert power to gain strong commitment from employees. Needless to say, commitment is preferred to compliance or resistance. Although compliance alone may be enough for routine matters, commitment is particularly important when the leader is promoting change. Change carries risk or uncertainty, and follow-up commitment helps to overcome fear and resistance associated with change efforts. So successful leaders exercise both personal and position power to influence others. They just have to know the balance. Next slide. Next slide, please. Right, so now we're going to talk about dependency. I'm going to hand you over to my colleague, Alicia.
Thank you very much, Kimberlyn. Okay, so now we're going to talk about dependency. When a person has control over something that others want and need, he or she gains power. So therefore, we can say that dependency is really the key to power. The level of power that person receives is based on how much people depend on them and how much control they have over resources. So persons may depend on leaders for resources such as jobs, information, knowledge, time, and much more. The nature of dependency relationships between leaders and subordinates in organization fluctuates depending on economic circumstances. For instance, where unemployment is high and jobs are plentiful, so there are a lot of vacancies available, people feel less dependent on their supervisors. However, where there is high unemployment, managers are given the upper hand because people would have a hard time finding comparable jobs and salaries elsewhere. Next slide, please. So now we're going to look at the characteristics that affect dependency and power in an organization. And as you can see, there are three, and these are importance, scarcity, and non-substitutability. So a resource may be important if it is an essential element of a product or may directly generate sales. So let me give you an example. Let's look at a PVC manufacturing company. Manufacturing organizations use raw material, as we all know, to build the final product. Manufacturing department requires raw materials and will depend on the purchasing department leader for the raw materials. So therefore, there's high dependency on that leader, giving him or her higher power. So as we can see, if we look on the right-hand side vertically, we can see for importance, when a leader has control over resources that are seen as very important, there's high dependency on that leader, giving him or her higher power. Now let's look at scarcity. So scarcity refers to whether the resources is easy or difficult to obtain. A resource that is difficult or expensive to acquire is more valuable and creates more dependency. So looking again on the right-hand side vertically, we can see where there is scarce resources. Once a leader has control over scarce resources, there is high dependency on that leader and he has high power. Now we can look at non-substitutability. So where a leader has control over resources with no substitute, there's high dependency on that leader and there's higher power. So for example, an executive secretary has daily access to CEO, might have more power than the middle manager, who must compete for a few minutes with the CEO. So the CEO is, you can't substitute the CEO. So that executive secretary has control over that. They have the advantage. So therefore, they have high dependency and they have higher power. Next slide, please. Okay, so now we're looking at strategic contingencies that affect leader power in organizations. So just a quick reminder, the 5 types of power Ian discussed earlier on was either from formal position or a leader's personal quality. These power sources here, however, are not related to the leader himself or his position, but to the role he plays in the organization. So I'm going to jump into each one of them. So let's look at interdepartmental dependency. This is one of the key sources of leader power. Materials, resources, information may flow between departments in one direction. Leaders in departments receiving resources will have less power than those providing it. So let me give you an example. Let's consider department leaders in Kip's Baking Factory. They have an automatic bakery production line. So the maintenance department and their leader are responsible for repairs of the machine. Because the maintenance department has the ability to fix unpredictable assembly line breakdowns, the production manager becomes dependent on the maintenance leader. So therefore, the maintenance leader has a higher power. Now we're going to look at control over information. It is fact that some people have access to more information than others. Top leaders typically have access to more information and can release it selectively for a desired outcome. Also, low-level leaders can control information to increase their power. So let me give you an example of a low-level leader. Let's take Kip again. So let's say Kip's top executive may depend on the production leader to analyze and interpret complex information, operational data for decision making. So therefore, even the top executive depends on the production leader. So therefore, the production leader has more power. Looking at organizational centrality. Centrality reflects a leader or department's role in its primary activity of the organization. So we're looking at what's the primary activity in this organization. Let's take, for instance, Apple, which is a heavily technology-oriented company. So therefore, the engineers would have a higher degree of power because the organization depends on them to maintain technical security of its product. Another example can be SpaceX. The engineers there have a high level of power. Also, we can look at hospitals. Doctors and nurses, they, they have high power. Okay, looking at coping with uncertainty. The environment can change swiftly and create uncertainty for leaders. Leaders in departments that cope well with uncertainty will increase power. So I'm going to give you another example. And we can say, let's take this again. Some departments in KISS may have great uncertainty about the launch of, let's say they're going to launch a new coconut milk bread. And all the departments, they are like, we don't know what will happen, whether demand will be high or low. But the market research department can gain power because they will come and say, hey, we know exactly what the demand for this product will be. So just being able to predict accurately, they gain power during uncertain times. Next slide, please. Increasing power through political activity. Politics involves activities to acquire, develop, and use power and other resources to obtain desired future outcomes. When there is uncertainty or disagreement about choices, politically skillful leaders strive to understand others' viewpoints, needs, desires, and goals, and use their understanding to influence people to act in ways that help the leader accomplish his or her goals for the team or organization. Uncertainty and conflict are natural in organizations. The politics is Politics is the mechanism for accomplishing things that can't be handled purely through formal policy or position power. So for instance, where there's conflict, there may there may not be a formal solution, and you may not be in the position in the organization to solve it. So here you can use politics to eliminate, let's say, like a rival. You can get them out of your way by even getting them promoted out of the department just by using politics. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Right. Leaders also use politics to increase their personal power. One way leaders, oh no, back at politics, please. Thanks. So leaders also use politics to increase their personal power. One way leaders increase their personal power is by seeking great responsibility, such as serving on committees or volunteering for difficult projects, which enable them to make connections with powerful people in the organization and build their reputation among those people. Another political approach is called impression management, which means people seek to control how others perceive them, often creating an impression of great power, as well as helping them gain more power. So for instance, they can use subtle name dropping to give the impression that they are associated with a high status person. So you might see someone might say, oh, my phone ringing, and it's Dr. Keith Rowley. That's my good friend. And they create an impression. So using politics to create an impression, and that will help him to gain power. Because once people know that you associate with him, they tend to respect you more and will do more of what you ask them to do, and so on. Next slide, please. So, asserting leader influence. So, this is how leaders use power to implement decisions, to facilitate change, and to pursue organizational goals. So, leaders can assert influence in 7 different ways. They can use rational persuasion. This is asserting leader influence by using facts, data, and logical arguments to convince others. So previously we spoke about expert power. So expert power can be used here as a tactic because this tactic is most effective when a leader has technical knowledge. Next, being likable. So it is easier to say yes to someone we like than someone we don't. Now, if we think back to the types of power, being likable will be exerting influence of a charismatic leader. Then we have relying on the rule of reciprocity. Previously, I mentioned dependency and how leaders gain power by having something that others value. Leaders can turn that power into influence by sharing what they have, whether it be their time, resources, services, or emotional support. Therefore, leaders who do favors for others can expect others to do favors for them in return. So it's essentially like I scratch your back, you scratch mine. Okay? And this would be an example of a coalition leader, and it would also be an example of looking at leader through a political frame. Developing allies. Developing allies is very much the same as the reciprocity. It's the coalition, except it's not like stricter reciprocity. So we're looking at like a long-term ally here. Excuse me. Oh, that's okay, Chrissy. Sorry. We're looking at long-term. We're looking at long-term allies where we can help each other a partnership. Here we're looking at the political frame of the organization and the charismatic and coalition leader. So we can also simply just ask for what we want. To have influence is to make a direct appeal by being clear about what we want and what we are asking for. Then we can also remember the principle of scarcity. In a case where certain information is scarce, okay, a leader can selectively release information by letting people know they're getting a sneak peek of the information, capturing their interest, and this makes them more likely to support the leader. So the leader might come and say to you, hey, I'm telling you this, but no one else knows. And just by that fact, you'll be more likely on board with the leader. We can also extend formal authority with expertise and credibility. So this is the final principle of asserting influence. The leader legitimate authorization in the organization. The key to successful use of formal authority is to be knowledgeable, credible, and trustworthy. And I'm sure that we can all agree that managers who are experts, honest, and they are straightforward will be a great influence compared to those managers who simply try to issue orders. Next slide, please. So now we'll be looking at ethical considerations in using power and politics. Next slide, please. In this diagram, leadership is divided into two types. So we can see socialized leaders. They exercise power in the service of higher goals that will benefit others and the organization as a whole. Personal leaders, personalized leaders are selfish, impulsive, and exercise power for their own self-centered needs and interests rather than the good of the organization. Next slide, please. So there's unethical use of power and politics. So Harry Truman once said that leadership is the ability to get people to do what they don't want to do and like it. This statement raises an important issue. Leadership is an opportunity to use power and influence to accomplish important organizational goals. But power can also be abused. So in the abuse of power, you may find that there are sexual harassment, deceptive practices, illegal activities, and non-consumer oriented behaviors. Next slide, please. So here are the guidelines for ethical action. So there are four main questions a leader can consider and ask himself in order to make ethical decisions. So these questions are, let's look at number one, is the action consistent with the organization's goal rather than being motivated purely by self-interest? Does the action respect the rights of individuals and groups affected by it? Does the action meet the standards of fairness and equity? Would you wish others to behave in the same way if your action affected you? Next slide, please. So, this brings us to the end of our presentation, and we'll just like to conclude. There are three types of leadership: transformational, transactional, and charismatic. The difference between power and influence. We also looked at ethical considerations when using power and the unethical use of power. Next slide, please. So we would like to know if there are any questions. We hope that you guys understood what was presented and you all have learned something. Are there any questions or comments? Anything? Okay, then we thank you for your time and good night.